Lynn. I'm chair of Nottinghamshire Healthcare NHS Foundation Trust. My pronouns are he, him. I'm really pleased to be able to welcome you to this seminar session that we've got as part of our LGBT plus History Month recognition and activities that we've got as a trust, but also alongside colleagues in our wider integrated care system, so the NHS and indeed a little wider as well. And LGBT plus History Month running throughout February, and we get an extra day this year. It's a unique opportunity for us to recognise the contributions of the LGBT plus community historically and today. And this year, I was really pleased to see that the theme is Medicine Under the Scope, which was a focus on celebrating contributions of LGBT plus individuals in the fields of medicine and healthcare. And that's given us and others in the NHS a really great opportunity to showcase the incredible work of LGBT plus colleagues, services and communities. And today's session is a part of what we've coordinated this year. And we will be moving on to be hearing from three speakers who are joining us, who are focusing on different aspects of bi-visibility. So us being able to take a bit of time today thinking about bi-visibility in history. Before we move to me being able to introduce them and their contributions though, I'm really pleased to be able to share with you a short performance by Singing Proud, a Nottinghamshire-based LGBT plus choir. It includes not healthcare colleagues and others from other partners in our integrated care system. And they've made a recording, especially for us to be able to play today. The song they're going to perform is Sister Rosetta, an ode to Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And those of us like myself of a certain age will remember great music from people like Sister Rosetta. She had been particularly popular in the 30s and 40s, a real, probably the first recording star of gospel music, dubbed the godmother of rock and roll, probably again, first recording star using electric guitar. 2018, she was posthumously recognised by entry into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as one of rock's great influences. And certainly also Rolling Stone magazine named her as the 6th greatest guitarist of all time. And why a song about Sister Rosetta? She was openly bi as she could be in the 40s and 50s. Obviously, a time when discrimination against LGBT plus people was widespread and very much institutionalized. You know, she was, as I say, as openly bi as she could be, whilst it never being mentioned formally on the record. I think it's great that we can acknowledge her contribution, both to music, but also as one of the great stars from the LGBT plus community. And I'm hoping, colleagues, somebody will be able to press play and us see and hear this performance. Thank you.
Listen everybody to these precious words.
Fantastic. What a great start for us today. So as I mentioned, we have three speakers who've kindly agreed to be with us and to share their thinking on aspects of bi-visibility today. In a little while, we'll hear from Al Edwards and Mark Cusack. But first of all, I'm delighted to introduce Rob Grayston, who is going to talk about emperors to general practitioners, LGBT plus figures in history. And Rob, up until recently, had worked in emergency planning and resilience for local government. He just recently, I think, moved to British Transport Police. He is bisexual, lives in Nottingham, and is also a history enthusiast, all of which I think, Rob, set you up really well for starting us off with your presentation. So over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. I will remute that. Apologies. That was on me. So hello, everybody. Apart from the reverb, it's lovely to see you all. And I'm going to be taking you on a quick run through of some LGBT plus history, which is going to cover a wide range. First things to say are that I am not a professional historian, just a keen being who happens to want to shed a bit more light on LGBT plus figures. This is an adaptation of a previously bi-focused history, so that's why we've got a slightly bi-theme in the colour scheme. And I'll be making references throughout to different historical figures using modern day language, but be mindful of the fact that most of the people probably wouldn't have referred to themselves in these terms, and they might not have gelled with some of these definitions. There's also a little bit of conjecture and assumption in here, but that's what historians like to do. They like to argue about things. Well, I mean, with some of this, just bear in mind things like when Alexander the Great was leading a cavalry charge at the Battle of Issus, he probably didn't ride forth with the war cry, "I am not limited in attraction to a single gender," whilst he was crushing the Persian Empire. So now we're all sitting comfortably, let's dive in. As soon as I can work out how to do the next slide, which will be, there we go. So, yeah, there we go. As you can see, history is pretty queer. There's a load of different figures there. Some might surprise you, some might not. A shiny cookie to anyone who can name all of them. Now, for a lot of history, you could be punished for displays of affection or attraction beyond what was considered normal. So in ancient Rome, for different parts of Rome lasted a long time, it was acceptable for a man to have sex with another man as long as he wasn't on the receiving end. Later on, this changed into a general negative perception around all homosexual activity, with a frequent emphasis on what men specifically got up to, as there's not a lot of recording on what women were getting up to as much. But even then, records very scanty in some places. And then, yeah, as you can see, there's assorted figures there, which I'll quickly point out. There's Sappho top left, possibly relevant for this talk, but maybe slightly controversial, Florence Nightingale. You've got Christina of Sweden, Emiliano Zapata, Alexander the Great, Emperor Ive Han. All people that, if you have a quick Google, you'll find a lot of famous historical LGBT plus figures. So next slide. Now, even though this is not specifically just on bisexual history, it's LGBT plus, because there's a bisexual theme, I wanted to get a slide in there. So yeah, have to give a slightly purpley bluey spotlight to this here. Contrary to popular belief, bisexuals aren't a new invention. We've been around for a while in whatever form you'd care to think about, including our pansexual, omnisexual, and polysexual siblings. So as a concept, it sort of began to take shape in the latter part of the Victorian period. So the 19th century saw a lot of sexologists, people investigating, turning into academic practice. Was a lot of theory, and the term bisexual got used for the first time in English. It was initially used as an interchangeable term for people who were intersex, or also in biology for organisms which and animals which had no sexual differences between male and female. And a German by the name of Richard von Krafft-Ebing pioneered the use of the word. It first was used when his book Psychopathia Sexualis was translated into English in 1892. And because of some of the things that will get mentioned shortly, a lot of this German research went on the back burner and was just stopped. So Alfred Kinsey took over this with some more academic rigor from the 1940s onwards. Okay, now we're going to skip over to the next slide and we start to get onto the medical side of things with figures of LGBT plus interest in the UK with medical backgrounds. So some of you may recognise some of these people. We've already had Florence Nightingale pop up, but James Barry in the top right there, who was an Irish surgeon, who was assigned female at birth, but grew up in a secret male identity, effectively, and became very highly ranked in the British Army as a surgeon, basically the number 2 top most important medical person in the British Army during the Victorian period. And his identity wasn't revealed until a post-mortem was conducted, which was specifically against Barry's wishes. It's noted that he helped with sanitary conditions and improvements to those who were less fortunate or considered less worthy, but could also fly into famous rages when these improvements weren't made, which even led to his arrest for poor behaviour. Interesting character who won a pistol duel with another officer by shooting the shaker off their head, so the big hat, and was known for an excellent bedside manner, but could be incredibly difficult to work with. And Florence Nightingale described him as a brute. So obviously, we don't know how he might have defined using modern terminology, but yeah, there is our first figure. Next up, we have Florence Nightingale, Lady with the Lamp. She may have been engaged for nearly a decade to a man, but she didn't go through with the wedding because she said it would interfere with her nursing work. She wrote in a letter that no woman excited passions among women more than she did. And she, well, this is one of those instances where it seems that things go in multiple different directions, and there is suitable evidence for arguing many different cases. But she did tend to refer to herself with a lot of masculine language. She called herself a man of action, but equally she didn't seem to have any romantic relationships. So there is argument that perhaps she had sapphic feelings, she could have been asexual. This is where the historians start arguing. But I think in modern terminology, a lot of younger people might just say the queer vibes are there. So we then move on to Sophia Jex-Blake, who was a founder of 2 medical schools to train women, one in London and another in Edinburgh. She was the 3rd registered lady doctor in the UK and was very big on education reform. She was one of the Edinburgh 7, which was a group of women who campaigned for the rights of women to be able to secure university qualifications. And because of their efforts and their campaigning, this ended up with the Medical Act 1876, which allowed women to practice medicine. So she was pivotal in medical history in the UK, and she had a long-term relationship with a fellow medical practitioner, Dr. Margaret Todd. And on retirement, they moved to a cottage not far from the south coast of England together for some medical practitioner cottage core sapphic rings down the south coast. Mm-hmm. So then hopping over to the continent after Victorian focus, we have the Institute for Sexual Wissenschaft, or Institute for Sexual Sciences, which was a Berlin-based institution that looked at research and education around sex, gender, provided free consultations and medical advice, decades ahead of its time in terms of outlook. Academic examinations, explorations of topics such as homosexuality, transsexuality, psychology of human relationships. It really was a world-leading institution. And unfortunately, being in Berlin in the 1930s with the rise of the Nazis, everything it had achieved was just, or the vast majority of what it achieved was destroyed. And this meant that just huge swathes of research and learning were gotten rid of, which was absolutely appalling. It put things back a little bit, but we will now skip back over to our side of the English Channel again to some slightly later figures, including Louisa Martindale, president of the Women's Medical Federation, and she also became the first woman member to be appointed to the Council of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in 1937. So she was very interested in venereal diseases and prostitution. They featured in her areas of research, but of course that was very controversial because you couldn't have women looking into serious things like that. Please note that that was a sarcastic tone. So she lived for several decades with another woman in a prime example of what several historians today might have referred to as very close friends or gal pals. But yes, it's incredibly likely that Louisa was lesbian and had a lot to do with basically pushing women's medicine in the UK. And then we have Sir Ewan Forbes, who was an interesting character. Managed to cover being a farmer, a baronet, and a doctor. So a trans man, Ewan received medical treatment around gender reassignment in Germany in the 1930s, because again, it was world leading, and went on to run a medical practice in a large rural part of Scotland, which during heavy snow actually required use of an ex-World War II armoured vehicle to get through the snowdrifts to go on house visits. Due to a re-registration of his birth certificate to amend it to being male, and the fact that a title came up in the family, there was a legal challenge from a cousin who said, no, you can't inherit. However, a legal battle followed, which involved, in fact, the Home Secretary, who eventually said, no, actually, yes, Ewan, definitely a man, definitely can inherit. So he married his housekeeper, with whom he also set up a dance troupe, and I assume that they drove their little tank off into the sunset to live happily ever after. We then can't really talk about this era sort of without starting with a lot of progress with LGBT plus figures coming to the fore, and then sort of bookending it just after the Second World War with Alfred Kinsey, who some of you may be aware of. He started off doing engineering and then botany, and then he looked at sexual reproduction in wasps, and somehow that made him, on that interesting pathway, end up as one of the foremost researchers in human sexuality. So he had lots of opposition to some of the key thinking of the time. He was very keen to stress that women were just as interested in sex as men were, which wasn't necessarily well accepted by the establishment. And he also was very keen to build connections with the people that he did research with, which is slightly different from the clinical approach that we have today. But he did seem to put out a lot of material. As you can see, he ended up on the cover of Time. He was also bisexual, and he created what we know as the Kinsey scale, which some people still use today, which measures sexual attraction from strictly homosexual to strictly heterosexual, with a later edition for people who are not so interested in sexual attraction. So there was an asexual option as well. And then I will move on to the quick end of LGBT plus history. No, that's not what I mean. But the end of my quick run through of it here. which is that obviously we've contributed a lot to society. As you can see, I wasn't fully aware of all of the medical contributions before I started looking at this. But there have been a lot of achievements, a lot of triumphs, and even though they've not always been easy, it just goes to show that no matter what happens, the LGBT plus community really does pull through and keeps winning. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope that you've learned something. And if you want to know more, I suggest you Google it.
However, the context that you brought there and us actually shining an LGBT plus spotlight and lens and also bisexual lens, really great to see. Just to say to colleagues who are on the call, I'm hoping there's an opportunity to get you to log any questions. What I suggest is we'll take them after we've heard from our other two speakers as well, just so that we can get all of their inputs and then we'll be able to hopefully have a kind of conversation. I appreciate the technology we're using. We'll be picking out your questions and hopefully then encouraging some responses from our guests. So I'd like to move on now to introduce Al Edwards. Al is the co-organiser of Nottingham Bitopia. I'm sure, Al, you'll describe Nottingham Bitopia to us. Also was the lead organiser of BICON 2023, which was held at Nottingham Trent University, so locally, and is vice chair of the Civil Service LGBT plus network. And Al is going to speak on the bisexual community from the 70s up to today. So Al, over to you.
Thank you. Can I get my slides showing on the screen? Yeah, thank you. As introduced, I'm a civil servant by day, and the rest of the time I'm a bi-community organiser whenever I'm not doing my day job. And the reason we're starting in the 1970s, that is really when we have the formation of a coherent bi-community that is distinct from the wider LGBT community. So let's get into it. So next slide, please. And so it started off sort of after the decriminalisation or partial decriminalisation in England and Wales in 1967. You had a gay and lesbian community that started to form, and that's really what it was called. The B wasn't really added until quite some time later. And that community, once they were able to have some legal freedoms, were starting to exercise those first and foremost sort of with gay and lesbian clubs and bars. So I've shown some local pictures here. On the left-hand picture, if anyone can recognise that these days is on Canal Street. In 1973, that was a club called La Chic that was only ran for a few years, but it was the first in the UK. It was the first club that was actually licensed as an LGBT club, as opposed to operated as that in practice or underground. And then on the right-hand picture, you can see the Old Dog and Partridge, which was back in the 70s, well known as a gay bar, still around today. And then there's an interesting anecdote that someone who was around in the bi community going back to the 80s and 90s once told me, that many of these clubs would allow bisexuals on weeknights when things were a little bit quieter, but not on Fridays and Saturdays when they were busier. So effectively, like, yeah, you can come to make up the numbers, but when we're doing good for business, you're not really part of it. And that was kind of the way things went for a long time with the bi. Although a lot of the original gay rights activists were bi, and Marsha P. Johnson, who threw the first brick in the Stonewall riots, was famously bi. A lot of the time, the bi people were kind of forgotten unless they considered themselves part of the gay and lesbian community. Can we go to the next slide, please? And then when we're talking about this period, we have to talk about biphobia. So again, I have this article, and I actually yesterday read that original Newsnight article, which you can find online. And actually, it's not too bad in terms of it interviews multiple bi people. It shows a variety of perspectives, but the tone is just this weird little species that are called bisexuals. And there's just something that feels a little bit off about the way, even though as a piece of journalism for the 90s, it's actually not badly written and certainly could have been a lot worse for that era. But there was this myth during the AIDS epidemic that bi men were the vector that spread AIDS from gay men, because obviously it was considered a gay disease, to straight people, especially bi men who were perhaps married and cheating or being deceitful. And that spread a lot of biphobia. There was actually no evidence for this. The epidemiology from the time shows that single-digit percentages of actual AIDS transmissions to women were from bi men. Nevertheless, that's the perception that stuck and what the media ran with because it suited a certain narrative. Next slide, please. And then this takes us into the 90s. Now, I'm not going to read all that here. This is from a document called the Bisexual Manifesto that was written in a deliberately provocatively called magazine named Anything That Moves, Beyond the Myths of Bisexuality. And this was just an example of where, if you go through what Rob discussed, the history of the term bisexual, it was very much a medical term. And this is an example of where the bi community decided to reclaim that term for themselves. And that they've been doing that progressively since the 70s, but this was sort of the most well-known example. The whole article is actually an excellent read, and it effectively says, stop telling us what we are, stop putting labels on us, let us be our own thing, effectively. And interestingly, if you read this one, it also addresses the gender binary in a way that was quite novel for its time, saying that gender isn't binary and that bisexual shouldn't be thought of binary, even though linguistically people might say, well, it's got the pronoun bi, which means two, but effectively they're saying we've reclaimed this word. It no longer means the medical term that has been imposed on us. It means what our community is using as its own identity. And so would absolutely encourage you to read it if you just Google the Bisexual Manifesto. Next slide, please. And then the big thing, what I mentioned before, that the bi community felt itself excluded from the wider gay and lesbian community, which later then became the LGBT community, was that they formed their own groups, because if they felt they weren't included, then sort of starting in America, started in the 70s, but it really took off in the 80s and 90s, they formed their own groups. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of bi groups, it's just some that I wanted to mention. So BICON is the bisexual conference that has been happening nearly annually since 1984. Last year, as mentioned, happened in Nottingham, but it was an example where the bi community felt that they didn't have an event that was just for them, so they decided to create one, and it's been going on continuously that whole time. It usually happens in a different city every year. Last year, I organised it in Nottingham. We had about 150 people come, and it was a mixture, as sort of the name suggests, of part conference with workshops that were educational, things that were a little bit more fun, and then part celebration for bi people, and part just place for bi people to meet, because where else are you going to get 150 bi people in one place? Nowhere, I think, nowhere in the world will you have any event that does that. The Bisexual Resource Centre is an American institution that was founded in Boston in '85. Biphoria merits a mention. It's a bi group based in Manchester, but it's the longest continuously running bi group in the UK. And that, again, is quite an achievement. Bi Community News is a newsletter that's still running both in print and online. You can look it up, and you can subscribe to the magazine for fairly cheaply. And they issue 4 publications a year, and they have a variety of articles on everything from media to sort of current events that relate to bi people. Bisexual Visibility Day is an interesting one because it's got a very specific date, but when you look up, it seems the date is a little bit arbitrary. Effectively, the long story is a bit more complex, but effectively, a group of bisexuals in the States decided that they wanted a day for bisexuality. One of their birthdays was the 23rd of September. So they said, starting in '99, right, this is now Bisexual Visibility Day, and it's stuck. That day is used by the bi community to celebrate bisexuality, and the week around it has since been called Bi Visibility Week. And in some cases, bi people are even, when they're well connected, able to get public buildings to fly bi flags for that day. Then Nottingham Bitopia is the group I run, which is a social group for bi people, which again was founded because it was felt that although there is quite a vibrant queer scene in Nottingham, there wasn't anything specific to bi people. So as about 10 years ago, someone decided to set it up, and that's how Bitopia was formed. I've been running it since 2017, and it's a social group. We meet once a month, we do the other event, we usually show our faces at Pride, and it is a space for bi people to be around other bi people. If you're interested, then if you look it up on Facebook and Twitter, you can find more about us there. And then Bi Pride UK is actually quite a recent addition, but it was, again, that Pride is a great celebration for the whole community, but that the bi can often feel a little bit drowned out or forgotten by everything else. So that takes place normally in September in London. If I can have the next slide. And the bisexual flag is a really important part of how the bi community created its own identity. So it was created in 1998 by Michael Page with the three colours. So pink represents attraction to the same gender because pink was sort of traditionally seen as a gay colour. Blue represents attraction to different genders because it was sort of the colour for straight men. And then purple represents attraction across the gender spectrum, but was also picked because it kind of blends in between the two colours and shows how bi people can often blend into the community and be overlooked or forgotten. And the flag was actually based on an earlier symbol called the biangles, the two overlapping triangles, which were based on the pink triangle that gay people had to wear during the Holocaust. And again, was a reclaimed symbol, but the bi flag was to make it recognizable and easy. And that was the idea behind it. It's a very simple design, but no one else uses that design. Except for, interestingly, I've had my COVID vaccine sticker actually uses the same colour scheme, which is where I've decided that the COVID vaccine, all the conspiracy theories about it are completely wrong. The real thing is it's just making it all, the bisexuals trying to take us all over. And then next slide, please. We'll talk about some other identities. So there are other identities under what's sometimes called the bi plus or multisexual umbrella, effectively people who are attracted to more than one gender. Most of these identities started cropping up, as far as I could tell, in sort of the late 2000s and the 2010s. Effectively, once the internet had really taken off and internet communities were more of a thing in the way we'd recognize them today, then inevitably people sort of formed their own sub-communities. And a lot of these communities are overlapping and these identities are very much overlapping. And the best way to think of them is they're not in conflict with each other. They are just people that might want to use a slightly more nuanced identity, kind of like someone that might want to identify with the city that they're born in rather than the country that they're born in. So pansexual means people who are attracted to, regardless of gender. Polysexual is people who are attracted to multiple genders, but not necessarily the entire gender spectrum. Omnisexual is someone that is attracted to all genders, sometimes with, sometimes without a preference. Abrosexual, I think, is quite an interesting one because it represents people who have a fluctuating identity that may be different at different times, which is something that a lot of bi people experience. It's not sort of a, right, my identity is always 20% this gender and 80% this gender. It can often fluctuate for many bi people, and abrosexual is a way of trying to find a word for that. And then biromantic is an identity for people who might experience romantic attraction to multiple gender, but not sexual attraction. And that's important because a lot of bi people are actually on the asexual spectrum. And there are a lot of unfortunate stereotypes about bi people all being hypersexual. And that's why biromantic is a useful identity. It's a reminder that not all bi people necessarily have sexual attraction or wild sex lives, as the stereotype would have you believe. Not everyone's interested in that. Not everyone's so lucky. So that is sort of a quick run through the bi community, and I think I'll hand over to Mark.
It was about that power of reclaiming that came through really strongly. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking I kind of recognise that more broadly across LGBT plus communities. But I really appreciated your focus there around the reclamation work that had been done from bi community. Really, really good to hear. So yes, you flagged we've got Mark next. I'm really pleased that Mark Cusack is able to join us online from that great city, Dublin. And Mark is a bisexual educator and an LGBT plus coach and mentor. And Mark, you're, I'm hoping, going to speak to us about bi plus visibility in healthcare. So hopefully we can go across to you, Mark. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. So thank you so much for organizing this event. It's really great to have the space to talk about bi or bi plus visibility. And I just wanted to build a bit on what Rob and Al were saying and just talk a little bit about why bi visibility is important and why it is that we don't really tend to see many bisexuals around. Because anybody, I guess, who's watching this would agree I'm sure, that you don't really hear much about bisexuality. It's really great that in recent years we've been growing in our awareness of lesbian, gay rights and issues. And also we've been hearing a lot more about the trans community and other parts of queer culture, which is absolutely fantastic. But it feels like a lot of the time the B in LGBT gets a little bit lost. And so I'm just going to say a little bit about that, and hopefully we can raise a bit of awareness here today. So the B in LGBT is actually the largest group in the LGBT community. That might come as a surprise to some people, but it is true. Bisexuals make up roughly just over 50% of the LGBTQ+ community. Just as an aside, this graph doesn't contain the T because trans is a gender identity rather than an orientation. Funnily enough, the most common sexuality for trans people is, you guessed it, bisexual. So not a lot of people know that. They think that if you are trans, then you are gay, and then you have some kind of transition and you become straight. That's not the case at all. Most trans and people who are on the gender diverse spectrum are also on the sexuality diverse spectrum. Unfortunately, bisexual people do not get anywhere near the amount of visibility or even funding or exposure that we would reasonably hope to expect given the size of our community. Now that's just in the LGBT community, but why don't we have a look at society at large? So officially in the UK, 1.3% of people define as bisexual. And a lot of the kind of resource allocation and the research is kind of based off of this idea that, okay, well, it's 1.3% of the population. Okay, so we're going to allocate resources, we're going to allocate attention based off of that. That's fine, except for the fact that it's completely factually baseless. And you only have to actually look at some of the proper research that's been done to see how misguided that statistic is. We spoke about the wonderful Alfred Kinsley earlier on, and this graph represents his famous scale, the Kinsey scale. And when you actually ask people to log their sexuality based off of a scale, rather than based off of are you gay or straight or bi, then an interesting thing happens. If you look at the turquoise bar, you will see that when people in the UK were asked to log their sexuality based on this scale, only 72% of people actually said that they were exclusively heterosexual. And if you look towards the right, you will see that 9% of people stated that they had some same-gender attraction. So already that's 9% of people are technically bisexual. I mean, that's what it is, somebody who is on the bi spectrum. But of course, almost none of those people will define as bi. And you will see then there's 6% of people are kind of even more towards the same gender part of the spectrum, and so on. And you'll also see at the right-hand side of the scale that only 4% of people actually define as exclusively homosexual. This flies in the face of what we are led to believe in the idea that, okay, you're either straight or you're gay, you're one or the other. And the interesting thing is that when you look at the lighter green column, this represents people who are 18 to 24, and you will see that less than half, that's less than half of young people in the UK define as exclusively heterosexual. That comes as such a surprise to so many people. And then, of course, you see 22%, 13%, you know, are on the bi spectrum, 3%. And then if you look at the right side of the scale, only 6% are exclusively homosexual. So it's not that much more really on the exclusive side. What this shows is that as the generations are getting younger, more and more people are accepting the fact that their sexuality lies somewhere on the scale. But people don't necessarily feel the need to define as this or that. And that's wonderful. This piece of research was done by YouGov, which is basically your most reputable social research organization in the UK. They do the electoral polls, and you know, it's as rigorously done as you can possibly hope for. So if all of these people are technically on the bi spectrum, then why don't we hear about it? We are not a minority, as you can see, but why do we feel like one? Has anybody ever heard of any of these people? I'm sure that when you're looking at this collage of our wonderful friends here, some of my favorite people, you will know at least some of them. These are pictures of, quite honestly, some of the most famous people on the face of the earth. You have there Whitney Houston, Freddie Mercury, Cara Delevingne, Mel B, Nina Simone, Harry Styles, Megan Fox, Angelina Jolie, Katy Perry, Lady Gaga. What do all of these people have in common? Well, they all identify as either bisexual or something on the non-exclusive sexuality scale. And whenever I do what I love to do, which is to point out that a lot of these people are bi or multisexual, fluid, I get shock. You know, when I say, oh, Whitney Houston was bi, people are like, what? Whitney Houston was bi? What? No, she wasn't. You know, she's even called a gay icon. You know, it's like, well, no, actually, she's a bi icon. You know, she's an LGBT, but people don't see her as a queer person. And most of the other people on this collage don't get considered to be queer, don't get considered to be LGBT. Even though we have hugely visible people in the media who are open about their sexuality. So why do we have this situation? What is going on? There are so many bi people, so many visible bi people. What's the deal? Whoops. So the reason for this is what we call bi erasure. And bi erasure is what happens when bi identity is erased either by the assumptions that society has, by ignorance, or just by the mere fact of people not getting to know about it by accident. So why do we have bi erasure? The first reason is binary thinking. We live in a world where we are assumed to be either gay or straight. We are also assumed to be either male or female. Everything that we're taught and conditioned with is about this gender binary and this sexuality binary. Bi people, even though we have bi, as Al said, we break the binary, and people find that really difficult to deal with. So bi people shake up the system, and a lot of people want to compartmentalize us so that they can keep us in this neat little box. The second reason is the fact that, unfortunately, we still live in a world where straight people or heterosexuality is seen as superior, or is seen as, you know, the best or the easiest way to be. And bi people sometimes will have the chance to actually pass what we call passing in the hetero world. And you might have a male-female relationship, or you might not be kind of what people would think of as queer presenting. So a lot of bi people get kind of stuck in the hetero world and don't get the opportunity to be open about their bisexuality. The next thing is sexism, as was touched on earlier on, particularly with bi women. A lot of the time bisexuality is brushed off as just something silly or something not important, not something serious. Maybe bi women are kind of just doing it for fun, or doing it for the kind of the enjoyment of their male partner. So sexism really adds to bi erasure. And you'll see with a lot of the female celebrities I just mentioned, there's a lot of like, oh, you know, we just didn't consider them to be bi. It's because we don't consider female sexuality to be serious still in our society, and that's so wrong. The next thing is couples. People tend to assume that you are the sexuality that relates to the gender of your partner. So if I, as a bi man or male presenting person, if I'm with a woman, people will call us a straight couple, right? And they will identify me as straight because I'm with a woman. If I'm with a man, they will call us a gay couple, and they will assume that I'm gay. So there's really no outwardly obvious symbol of being bi. And so a lot of us bi people will have little badges, little cups, little merch, little pictures to try to actually say, look, I'm bi. Then related to that is language. Like I said, gay couples, we also say things like gay marriage, gay sex, gay bars, when what we mean is marriage or same-gender marriage. We say gay pride, we mean pride. Gay bars, we mean LGBT bars. You know, gay sex, we just mean sex between a man and a man or whatever. So these kind of forms of language erase bisexuals whenever we use them. And then finally, there's just the complacency. I think a lot of people think that, okay, if we have equal marriage and we have lesbian and gay rights, then, well, we can kind of forget the rest of the community. But bi, trans, intersex, asexual, and other parts of the community really still need everyone to be fighting for us, because we are part of the community as well. And so why is it important for us to have bi visibility? I particularly wanted to mention this because, you know, we are perhaps people here who work in the healthcare sector. Bi erasure and biphobia can lead to extreme problems. I'm a mental health coach. I work with bi people every day, and the mental health impacts of all of this are absolutely huge. Bi people suffer from anxiety and depression much higher than straight or gay people. And also there are a lot of conditions, OCD, ADHD, PTSD, which we suffer from particularly. One of the most common forms of OCD is actually obsessions about your sexuality. So when bi people are being told, well, you're either gay or you're straight, and that's not matching up to what we are, we start to obsess. We obsess, and we get compulsive about trying to check, okay, what am I gay? Am I, you know, do I like men or women, or what am I? And we get gaslit completely all of the time by society, and it's just, the anxiety is absolutely huge. We also have a great crossover with autism, the autistic spectrum and the bi spectrum, which is wonderful, but it's just another kind of thing that a lot of people don't realize, because, you know, we both see gender, I guess, and attraction in a different way to what might be considered the heteronorm or the neurotypical norm. And then we have a whole raft of other really horrible things that come out of being treated this way, particularly sexual abuse, women's sexuality being fetishized, you know, oh, you're bisexual, therefore you're up for it, leading to, you know, sexual harassment, sexual abuse. And then domestic violence as well. The fact that bi people are not trusted. You know, it's this idea that, okay, well, you're bisexual, that means that you are going to run off with somebody else. You know, not being secure and stable in yourself and in what you're feeling and your thoughts, being gaslit. It's all a perfect cocktail for bi people to be abused or exploited in many different ways. So this is why it's really important to support bi people to feel safe in themselves. And just finally, some of the ways that we can do this, particularly in the healthcare sector, I would say would be, number one, keep an open mind, because as we know, bi people won't necessarily identify as bi or won't necessarily present as queer. So just keep your mind open and never assume somebody's sexuality, because they might be bi and just not telling you. The second thing is visibility, making proactive actions to show that you're a safe space for LGBT people or for bi people is really appreciated, because we might not always tell you proactively ourselves. So if we see it, then we feel safe. Making resources available. We have such a lack of information available on bisexuality, so the more that we can learn, then the better. And also targeting those resources. You know, for example, you might target information about monkeypox to gay men, right? But most men who have sex with men do not identify as gay. So there you're missing most of your target group. Yeah. So it's just about thinking about people who don't necessarily fit into that that predefined box. And then education, having wonderful events like these are so important. This is where I first found out about bisexuality at one of these events. So really happy that you're doing this, and thank you so much. And then the final thing is equality. So just treating all people in all parts of the LGBT spectrum as equal and equally deserving of support. So that's just a little canter through bi-visibility, why it's important. If you'd like to find out more about the bi spectrum, I'm on Not Defining. I have a lot of information available, and those are the channels that I have. You can come and find out more about the wonderful world of bisexuality. I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you, Mark. Really great. Again, you've been able to help us then hone in on particularly some of the focus around healthcare, and also that slide just at the end there about some of the things that we can do. We've got about 15 minutes, friends and colleagues, to see if we've got any questions. I think there is a question already. I'm looking across at Al and Rob, who I think have got the question there. Is one of you able to read out the question and then respond to it? We'll see also, Mark, if there's anything you want to add as well. So if we could go across to you two, please.
Yep, so the question was, how does the term bisexual interface with non-binary? You intimated that there is overlap, potentially some grey areas. So first of all, let's go for what non-binary means to most people. And all these terms, the definitions are not set in stone. You can look in a dictionary, but that isn't necessarily the word the community uses. Dictionaries are always playing catch up with that, even in recent times. So non-binary is people whose gender identity, their own sense of gender, falls outside the what we would call male and female. So I identify as non-binary because to me, the binary gender spectrum it doesn't work. It feels like putting me in a box that doesn't fit. And bisexual means generally how the community would define it, but individuals might define it a little bit differently for each person, is people who are attracted to more than one gender. So someone can be bisexual and non-binary, that's in my case, or they could be bisexual and attracted to multiple different genders, including non-binary people. Those terms aren't mutually exclusive. And if you look at the linguistics of the word bi, you're kind of looking at it from the wrong perspective, because like I showed on one of my slides, the bi community has reclaimed that word. So it doesn't really mean what it may have originally meant in the Victorian times when clinicians started to use it to refer to people displaying certain behaviour. The best analogy I can give is sort of, well, oct means 10, but the October is not the 10th month because someone decided to redefine it at one point, and that is how the word works. And so sort of don't get too caught up in, well, this is what the prefix means. Sort of bisexual as a word has taken on a new meaning by the community, and therefore that meaning isn't exclusive of the word non-binary. I hope that answers the question as thoroughly as possible.
No, thanks, Al. It's really helpful. And I'll just check. I don't know, Mark or Rob, is there anything you would want to add in on that? Mark, no.
No, I think that was very comprehensive from Alan there.
Okay, have we got any other questions that have landed there? I know I'm sitting here with a question myself, but to that, is there another one there? There is another one.
I'll just go down. Yeah, let's go. That's the question.
Has the session been recorded?
Oh, there's a question about has the session been recorded? And I'm getting a nod that yes, the session has been recorded, and will be available, say, through our usual channels. Was that the question that was there? I wonder if I could ask one then that perhaps Mark, if I could come to you first, but also come to Rob and Al as well. And I was particularly struck by some of the statistics that you referred to early on, Mark, and there's a question there for me about, okay, if as organisations, as people working in healthcare, if there's one thing we could do to help improve bi visibility, both within our organisations, but also thinking about our services, what might we do? So sorry, there's probably multiple questions in there, Mark, but I wonder if I could ask you to just give a thought on some of the things, just building on your last slide, I think, about some of the things that we might think about, both organisationally, but also as individuals working in healthcare and thinking about both our organisations and services. Mark, could I go to you first?
Sure. I think the first thing is exactly what you're doing right now, which is thinking about it and acknowledging it and learning about it. So that's really, I think, 90% of it. The big thing that we face is that we just get forgotten. So honestly, you focusing on it is the main thing. I think a really big thing is language. So if there's any kind of resources going out, if there's any kind of leaflets or websites or presentations or just anything like that, if you can just be conscious that the language is including bisexual people, or if you're speaking about sexual acts, for example, using things like men who have sex with men or women who have sex with women, you know, spelling it out rather than just saying gay people or something like that. So really inclusive language. And then the other thing is just as many visible cues as you can, both that you are a safe place for LGBT people, but also that you're a safe place for other non-represented parts. For example, a lot of people put pronouns in their email signature, for example. That to me, as a bi person, shows me, okay, you know, you're actually thinking about this, you're a place that is understanding those less represented parts. So just those visible little small acts and the language and just putting focus on it, I think is going to go a long way.
Great, thank you. That's some really helpful tips there. I wonder, Rob, anything that you would add in on that bit, that sort of just to help us think about more that we could do?
Oh, well, I mean, Mark's pretty comprehensive at this. So, in terms of visibility, yeah, things like this happening. But I think having previously, when I was in local government, come to some of these things because we were told about it, just letting partner organisations know, because we didn't necessarily have I think it might have been a Christmas quiz or something, but we didn't have fun stuff like that happening. But I heard it was happening within the ICS. So I came along and it was great. And we did a sing along and we wore tinsel or whatever. And
Yeah,
it's not a huge amount, but if you can find quick and easy ways to talk to people who are nearby, that encourages them. So, yeah.
thank you. Al, anything you'd add?
Yeah, what I'd say is don't make assumptions about that identities necessarily equate to behaviour, because I've been on the receiving end of that from sexual health services, unfortunately also in this area, I have to say, in the past, where they would assume that bisexual means firstly that you are engaging in these specific acts, secondly that you're engaging in them regularly, and thirdly that you're engaging with them in a high risk way without taking care of your sexual health. And those things, it's quite hurtful and offensive to have those things assumed about you by a professional. It's even more hurtful when your partner is also, just as a matter of being responsible, going to a service for just a checkup and then being told, oh, you're at high risk because your partner is bisexual. And it's not good. And it's also not good healthcare, because you will have people that are upset, but also people that in future will be less willing to be forthright about what kind of behaviours they engage in. And potentially you're making inaccurate assumptions. So it's far better just be open-minded and ask the person, okay, tell me, sort of go back to what Mark said, ask the patient, what is it you engage in? How are you doing that? Rather than, oh, great, I can tick this box and now I'm going to make all these assumptions.
Yeah, thank you. And that reminder of the impact of assumptions on individuals, on colleagues and people who are needing and using our services. It's really important for us to think on.
And that leads us on to the next question.
Great, another question. Could one of you read that?
Do you want to read that?
Oh, go on then. See, teamwork makes the dream work. If you were meeting a new health professional for the first time and you were introducing yourself as an LGBT plus person, what would the gold standard of care look like from that professional to make you feel seen and respected while you're getting care?
Great question. Al, given that you were just talking there about some real life experience, would you be okay starting with that one?
Sure. So for me, it would mean that the healthcare professional is treating me as an individual rather than trying to make assumptions, because I understand in public health, you have to make assumptions when you're looking at populations to be able to decide what services to deliver. But in individual healthcare, it should be about the individual and not trying to assume anything. So I would, open questions would make me feel more relaxed, and just sort of feeling like I'm being taken seriously for my healthcare needs and not being treated differently. Oh, well, you're just one of those people that just is getting on a bandwagon kind of thing, but rather treated seriously, whether it's for mental health care, because unfortunately bi people statistically are more likely to have poor mental health, that you're treated as an individual and with respect and with sympathy, regardless of what the healthcare need is that someone's coming, especially sort of in community healthcare settings. Bi people might be coming to their GP with lots of different issues occurring at the same time, and that all of them are then taken seriously, rather than, oh, well, you're just a hypochondriac or something like that, when unfortunately a lot of bi people have complex physical and mental health needs, and those need to be treated seriously and courteously.
Great. Mark, anything that you'd add around that gold standard?
Yeah, totally agree with what Al said. Thank you for that, Al. The one thing that I would add is privacy. I know that in healthcare, confidentiality is really important. I think it's particularly important for bi people because most bi people aren't out. So most bi people that you interact with in a healthcare setting will be too afraid to be open about that with their partner, their friends, their family. So privacy and confidentiality with anything that they share with you is extremely important, and not making assumptions about, you know, family, partners, that kind of thing. I would just add as well, in mental health particularly, there are a lot of therapists, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists who would be what would be described as LGBT affirming. And that is really great because, I mean, speaking for myself, I can't even, you know, think about going to anyone who is not actively stating that they're LGBT affirming. But even within that group, it can be really nerve-wracking because there's a focus on gay and lesbian people. And when you talk about bisexuality, you can be met with like a, you know, oh, what's that? Or something like that. Plus, asexual people, there are a lot of bi and ace people, you know, intersex people who are also non-binary and who are also pansexual, you know, these things. And like, it's really nerve-wracking to go into a therapy session or a psychiatry session with somebody who kind of doesn't understand what that is. Like Al said, we don't need everybody to understand all the acronyms and all the rest of it. But what it's about is being open to that and not making assumptions about it. So
Right.
that's what I would say.
Thanks, Mark. And Rob, I'll give you just an opportunity to see if there's any last thing that you would add in on this one.
I mean, I'm not sure what I can add to something which is quite so thorough. I mean, I'd just be adding some sprinkles on the top, but no, otherwise I agree pretty much with what Mark and Alan said.
We would never refuse the sprinkles.
Of course not.
Yeah, we would always want that.
Great. Look, we're almost at our time, I think. Colleagues, the last thing from me is just to express really heartfelt thanks to Rob, to Al, and to Mark for your contributions, your presentations, sharing your thinking, your insights, and parts of yourselves as well. Really do appreciate that. A thanks to Singing Proud. I thought that was a lovely start for us, and certainly is a part of what I would want to go back to review on video, and also just to put a thanks out to the team who have organised and are supporting and enabling these events. They help us as an organisation and us as an integrated care system really take time to do some of that acknowledgement and recognition that our speakers have so clearly presented to us. So thanks everybody, and look forward to seeing you again at something else. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thanks to them in the room.